Messages from the Dark Side. This is your host, Dylan Ludwig, also known as Mr. Hyperaware, and I'm joined by my wife and co-host,
Alyssa Ludwig, also known as the Earbud Bookworm. This is the monthly book club podcast where we cover all sorts of genres with a specialization in spooky.
And in today's episode, we are going to be covering The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, which was also adapted into the film Knock at the Cabin, which was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. So, babe?
There will definitely be spoilers, so if that's not, if this is not something that you've read or watched and you don't want to hear spoilers yet, then come back and listen or watch this episode when you have finished that so that you can be included in the spoiler talk. And if you're ready, let's go.
All right. So, babe, got a question for you.
Yeah.
You ever want to rent a cabin and stay there for a little bit? For a little romantic getaway?
I mean, I did. I don't know now, man. No.
Let's break this down. What is it about cabins in horror that is so, popular?
Well, I think a big part of it is that they're secluded.
Mm-hmm.
They're, generally away from other people. They're away from towns and civilizations. Excuse me, I'm still getting over an upper respiratory thing. So I think the seclusion is a big part of it, and a lot of, now that there's cell phones, it's harder to feel secluded, but a lot of cabins don't get good reception because they're out in the woods.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it. Did you have anything to add?
There's also, I wonder if it's just that kind of the proximity to nature. A lot of primal human fears originate from nature, whether it's going back to what the original thing that humanity was afraid of, which was going out of their caves and finding an animal that wants to attack them. We have bears in the woods, which, to be fair, I would rather come across that than a person any day.
Yes.
That debate is plenty out there online.
That old chestnut.
But it's a thing where I can't even pinpoint the first horror movie that really popularized using a cabin as a set piece. I want to say maybe the original Friday the 13th was the one that made it super popular. It's not the first, but it's the one that made it popular.
That's possible.
And then we had Evil Dead after that. And then years later, we would have something that would deconstruct it, like a movie called Cabin in the Woods.
Right.
Which is one of my personal favorite horror movies.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And this book came along. I didn't know who Paul Tremblay was before I picked up this book.
To be fair, I didn't either, although I read it much later than you did.
Yeah. I was drawn to the book based on the title because I thought that, this is going to be another case of Cabin in the Woods. And it ended up being so much more than that. So let's go ahead and break down what this book is about.
Okay.
So do you want to run down just a basic, elevator pitch of it?
Well, I mean, it's about this couple and their daughter. It's a gay couple. They are the two dads, and
Andrew and Eric.
Yep, Andrew and Eric,
and their daughter, Wen.
Yep, and they are on a vacation at a cabin, and Wen is outside playing by herself. She's
catching grasshoppers.
I don't know if they ever specify her age, but she's definitely early elementary, I think. Did they specify her age?
I feel like she was at least, was she younger than 10?
I was thinking she was maybe 8.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. But because they're, in the woods and in a relatively secluded area, they're letting her play outside by herself. She's catching grasshoppers. She has promised, to be very careful, not to let them die. And while she's out there, this man comes up and starts talking to her and trying to be her friend.
Yeah.
And honestly, as a parent, that is terrifying.
Yeah.
That is truly terrifying.
And at that age...
Just right there.
At that age, her stranger danger has not really kicked in in high gear.
Not the way it should.
The man in question, Leonard, is getting really personable with her and trying to be her friend. And then she starts to notice that there's 3 other people that just show up out of the woods behind him. And she's like, who are they? Are they your friends? And they're like, I wouldn't call them my friends, but they are with me. Yeah,
and then it just kind of goes off the rails from there, where she goes to tell her, excuse me, she goes to tell her dad's, what's going on. And then they start knocking and saying scary things, and they've got weapons.
And they're doing it in this way of going like, we don't want to be here. We just want to talk. What we're doing here is very important, and you have to work with us. They're not, they're not doing the whole like, oh, we're gonna get in there and we're gonna fuck you up.
Right.
Well, one of them might be, but like.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But otherwise, they have. I wouldn't say that they have benign reasons for being there.
No, but they definitely are. They're imposing and they're scary, but not in a
weapons.
But not in a blatant way. They're not. They're not blatantly just saying like we're gonna kill you, we're gonna hurt you, anything like that. They're like, we have a decision that you need to make.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they are there to try to prevent the end of the world. And the whole book is about them going through that process. And as the audience and as the protagonists, we and they are kind of trying to figure out, like, what is going on here. Because clearly they're not really trying to stop the end of the world by terrorizing this family, right?
No, they present them with this sort of decision that the family has to make, which is that they have to sacrifice one of themselves, or one of them has to sacrifice another, and that's going to be what prevents the end of the world. They can't do anything about it, and for every amount of time that passes that it doesn't happen, one of the intruders gets sacrificed by the rest of them. And when that happens, supposedly there's some correspondence with the news reports going on their TV that there are these calamities that are happening as each of them happens. Now, they present it very vague. You're not clear whether or not one is correlating with the other. It's the whole correlation versus causation sort of
right
thing. Is this all coincidence, or are they actually telling the truth? And for the most part, the parents are being very firm in their belief of, like, these guys are just, they're delusional.
Right.
However, Eric, Daddy Eric, does suffer a concussion in the midst of the initial intrusion. And so now he's starting to kind of have these doubts. He thinks he's seeing things or visions that are corresponding with what the zealots are telling them. And so it kind of throws this big question of, like, okay, well, is the supernatural actually happening, and is this actually the apocalypse, or are these people just having a shared delusion and came together through circumstance, or are they even lying about it? But
right, exactly. And that's especially true for I just re-listened to the book and I already forgot his name. Redmond. Yeah. I wanted to call him Redford. Yeah, that's
Robert Redford is very homophobic. I don't know if y'all know it.
That's definitely true for Redmond, because there's that whole extra storyline about the previous attack on one of the dads.
He has a history with them.
And the appearance that this man is actually the man that attacked him in a bar 13 years ago.
Yeah. So, essentially, where you come down on this dilemma is very similar to the trolley problem. Now, here's a question. Where do you fall on the trolley problem? Like, as a blanket sort of opinion?
That is so difficult because part of me is like, well, I'm not going to do anything because...
And for those who don't know, the trolley problem is the fact that you got two tracks. One has multiple people tied up, and then one has one person tied up. And the train is going towards the multiple people, but you have the option on the switch to move it over to run over just one person instead of the group.
And there's no option to just stop the trolley.
Yeah, if you don't stop the trolley, it will just crush, like, the group of people.
Right. And so, obviously, like, my first instinct is, well, I'm just not going to do anything because it wasn't my responsibility to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to let things kind of take their course, so to speak. But at the same time, not taking action is a form of action in itself.
Right.
And so I feel like I don't have an answer. I don't. I would like to, think that, oh, well, I'll figure out a way to get the trolley off the tracks or something. Like, I don't want other people's lives in my hands. I just don't.
Right.
I mean, obviously, we have kids. I do, I've got their lives in my hands,
Right.
but that's a little different.
So here's the thing. For me, I would be the one to pull the switch because I fall in line with this whole thing of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few.
Okay.
If you could save more people than one, then that's the preference. That being said, that does not apply in this specific situation in the book, which is basically the trolley problem on a macro scale. If we're to believe that an apocalypse is actually going to happen unless I kill one of my family members, then I am not. I would be the one to be going. I'm not making that decision.
So what's the difference, though, between that and the trolley problem?
I guess,
What's the difference?
So the difference is that, for one thing, there's an emotional charge that goes in.
Right.
It's like, oh, I have to defend my family now? Then, okay, yeah, I would I'd do that. The other thing is, and we'll touch on this as we get more into the nitty-gritty of the spoilers, is if some divine being decided that this is the only way that you can prevent an apocalypse, if you don't, it's the whole, who is the in the Bible, the father that kills his own son.
Oh, right.
To appease God.
Right.
I can't remember his name. But it's that whole story of, like, okay, well, what kind of divine entity? Why would they want me to do that? If they did want me to do that, then why should I be worshiping that?
Exactly.
Why should I be bowing down to that?
Right.
Whereas, like, a trolley problem, like, there's no implication of that. It's just simply a theoretical.
Right.
So, before we get into the spoilers, I think it's important to talk about Paul Tremblay as an author. Now, so I'd mentioned that this was the first thing of his that I ever read, and then a year or two later, I read Head Full of Ghosts, which there's a lot of parallels to with this one, which is, they're almost like sister books in a way, because that book is very much about the question, it's about demonic possession, but it's also a question of, like, okay, well, is it actually demonic possession, or is it mental illness?
Oh, okay.
So it's ambiguity there. And then this one is doing the same thing, except for, divine forces, but is it also just a bunch of people that are crazy?
Right.
Which I hate to use that term. I guess you'd say that they're delusional, or that maybe they're just kind of using it as a smokescreen for alternative motives.
Right.
So there's a lot of parallel between that, and then I also there's some parallels in his later book, The Pallbearers Club, which we both just read.
Yeah, I just finished that this morning.
And I definitely the weakest of Tremblay's works, in my opinion.
I've only read 3 so far. So is the Cabin, Pallbearers Club, and then I also read No Sleep Till Wonderland, which you said you haven't read. That one's a shorter one. That's one reason that I picked it, because I wanted to have a couple under my belt before we recorded this episode, and I only had a couple of days to listen to them.
Yeah.
So that one was definitely a little bit different. There wasn't, as far as I could tell, any really supernatural elements, real or imagined.
Yeah.
It was more just like a straightforward kind of mystery, thrillerish kind of book. There definitely was some elements that were like bordering on supernatural, but not actually supernatural, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm currently on Survivor's Song right now, but that one's kind of different because that's more of a straightforward zombie book. But the reason I bring up Head Full of Ghosts in comparison to this is that ultimately, like, it tricks you into thinking that there is supernatural as the horror, but really the horror is localized to human beings are awful.
Oh,
and
yes.
and
And I think
human capability is awful.
I would say we can all agree on that, but I'm sure there are a lot of people that don't agree on that. But I think you and I can agree
Because
on
the
that.
horror comes from the people that are terrorizing this
Yes.
family.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And should this be where we get into spoiler territory?
Yeah, let's.
Here?
I think it's going to be hard to go any farther without doing spoilers.
Okay,
So this is your cutoff. If you have not read this book and you want to read it without any spoilers, go ahead and turn off this episode and come back later.
There you go. 3, 2, 1. You gone? Okay,
all right.
Cool.
All right.
So the thing is that you get to this point in the book where the daughter is accidentally killed.
Yeah. Which, P.S., the first time that I read that book, I was at work, listening to it on my earbuds, and just one earbud, I literally cried at work.
Yeah.
Because that just, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. And what happens from there is that because the death was an accident, it's not counted as a sacrifice.
Right. Because the whole point of a sacrifice is the person that's being sacrificed has to make that decision. And she didn't make that decision.
So I think the thing about the book that it ends up being beautiful by the end of it, and beautiful in a grotesque way, but beautiful in terms of like just its thematic symmetry or whatever, is that ultimately the book is an indictment on religion.
Yeah.
And it's an indictment on blind faith.
Yeah.
And cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. It's criticizing all of these different things. And so, you get to this conclusion where supposedly there is disaster after disaster. There's kind of this like otherworldly feel to it at a certain point. And it comes down to this question, like the question of like, okay, well, if one of the parents sacrifices the other, will that stop it? I think what's cool is that by the end they go, well, we don't care. It's not important anymore.
Right.
And it leaves you not even knowing if any of this was real at all. It's all ambiguous by the end of it, because that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is like, well, if a God would not consider our daughter's life counting towards something, then what's the point? Like, what's the point of even going on living? Which, I don't know about you, but like, if that happened with any of our kids, I'd probably have that sort of same feeling as well, where I'd go, humanity can burn for all I care. Like,
exactly.
I shouldn't have to be responsible for everybody else, and especially if it's not, if my child's life didn't matter towards that equation, then why?
Right. No, yeah. Jeez. Anyway.
I don't know, but like, how do you feel about where it ends up, where it's like, it keeps it vague?
Yeah, no, I like that. I know there are some people that don't like books and movies that end on like a vague note, and there are some that take it a little too far.
It depends on the material for me.
Right, but I definitely do like the way that this book kind of lets you decide for yourself whether it was or wasn't actually something supernatural, divine going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that kind of ambiguity and vagueness at the end so that you can make your own decisions.
Yeah.
And like in my mind, when I read it that it was just some people that met on a message board and were sharing this delusion, and they kind of all talked each other into it. And I feel like there are hints that might be the case throughout the book.
The only thing that would throw a wrench in that is, how do you explain the news reports lining up then?
I mean, I feel like there's only one that was like completely bizarre enough to really be off the rails. And then there is the whole idea that they kept watching their watches and all that. So maybe they had some sort of inside information.
Yeah. They even imply that maybe it was like closed circuits.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's definitely ways that it could have played out that the news reports were faked, or delayed or something like that.
Yeah. Is this where we should get into
The movie?
the movie?
Yes.
So, Knock at the Cabin, which was M. Night Shyamalan taking the reins on this story.
Which I would like to preface by saying I am actually an M. Night Shyamalan fan, so... yeah, I know, you're not, but I am.
I'm very hit or miss with him.
Well, okay, to be fair, I haven't seen a lot of his more newer stuff, but I'm like an OG Shyamalan fan, so...
Yeah, you like The Village, and I'm not
I
a fan
do.
of that
The
movie.
Village is probably my favorite Shyamalan film. I love that movie. But my point is, as we continue to talk about this movie,
Yeah.
I want people to understand that I am not saying anything that I say out of a anti-Shyamalan bias. All right, let's go.
All right, so, which, by the way, Unbreakable is still probably my favorite Shyamalan.
Yeah.
That's why...
That's valid.
That's why I got very disappointed that Glass it didn't end up being the movie I was hoping it would be.
Yeah, I liked Glass, but it definitely was one of the weaker ones. All right, let's go.
Here's the thing with the movie, because, like, when they announced this, I didn't even know it was an adaptation of this book until I watched the trailer, and they had the opening sequence of them breaking into the cabin and them kind of laying down the law on them. And
well, yeah, because they changed the name entirely, and his name wasn't even attached, was it? At first?
Okay, so it's not in the trailer. It is in the opening credits of the movie.
Yeah, of the movie, but not in the advertisement.
They weren't crediting, but then again, Paul Tremblay is not like a Stephen King.
Well, no, I know, but still, I mean, it's his book. He should have...
could have even said, like, based on the bestseller.
Right.
So, where do I begin on this one? Let me say something positive about the movie.
Yes.
I think that for one thing, for the first half of it, it's actually a pretty faithful adaptation because I actually just just rewatched it on Peacock.
I didn't. I did not. I have very limited time right now, and that is not something that I wanted to spend my time on.
So I will give it credit that I think it's Shyamalan's best directed film, like in terms of his style and just the camera angle choices and just the overall mood of it.
Although, I mean, it was beautiful.
Although I personally would have preferred it to be a little bit more surreal as it went along. Like what I imagined the end of that book being was something more along the lines of like Mandy, the Nicolas Cage movie, in terms of just kind of this otherworldly.
Yeah, getting a little bit
like you see
weirder as it goes.
And that's kind of like what I imagine.
Right.
But instead, this one kind of stays grounded all the way through.
Which is almost weirder.
Now they change a lot. For one thing, Leonard is way younger in the book.
Yeah, he's what is he? 24 and a half.
24 and a half. He makes a big point about that. And all respect to Dave Bautista, he is not 24 and a half.
He is not. Well, and not only that, but Redmond,
Rupert Grint,
is in the book mentioned to be older than Leonard, and Rupert Grint is definitely not older than Dave Bautista.
He's closer to my age.
Right. Well, I think he's closer to my age.
You know, they're both really good in the movie. Rupert Grint's not in the movie a whole lot. But I think that this movie does have Dave Bautista's best performance of his entire career.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And that's kind of where it goes into the tragic thing that I'm going to say later about the movie. I also think that the actor playing Wen is really, really good.
Oh, yeah. No, she was really good.
So they do deviate at the point right before Adrian dies. Because they actually do sacrifice her in the movie, and they also kind of give her this extra character beat of her having a son, which is not in the book. Sabrina actually gets really short-shifted in the movie. They just take her out, which, like, they just shoot her.
Yeah.
Whereas she gets a lot of the kind of making the point clear at the end of the book. Yeah,
I feel like there was a bit that was actually in first person from her, yeah?
It was, yeah. And instead, because I think it's because Bautista's the bigger name, they give a lot of that characterization to Leonard.
Right.
Because he's the last one to go in the movie. But this is where my problems with the movie start to come in. For one thing, the news reports are not nearly as convincing in the movie as they are in the book.
No,
I think a lot of that's because of a lot of bad CGI.
That's possible, yeah.
It
Yeah.
takes me out of it.
It definitely plays different. It plays different in the movie.
It raises way more questions to the validity of their claims than than the book does.
Right.
And I hate to be this guy that compares book to movie, but fuck it, that's what.
Well, I mean, you have
that's
to.
What we're doing.
You
here.
have to.
The biggest thing is that they changed the ending.
Yes, and
which, by the way, I called it. The minute that they said that Shyamalan was adapting,
I know
this,
you were like,
he's gonna
change
this ending, and it's not gonna have the punch that it has because I feel like in him doing that, between that and the name change, that was Shyamalan trying to go, I'm going to put my stamp on this.
Right.
It's good. This is gonna be all singularly me. And to be honest, the parts of the movie that are the strongest are when it is directly adapting the book because the book is so strong.
Right.
The biggest thing that they do is that Wen doesn't die.
Right.
But they do sacrifice Eric, and in turn that actually prevents the apocalypse.
Right.
Which raises a lot of questions about what it is trying to say about the queer representation that is in the movie itself.
Well, and the thing that, I said when we first watched it was, yes, the queer representation is a big factor, but also even taking that out, even if it were a straight family, even if it were a heterosexual couple and their child, the irresponsibility of giving validity to this kind of religious extremism.
Or basically, these people are just conspiracy theorists.
Right. Well, I mean, but I mean, I don't have an issue with religion. I do have an issue with religious extremism, and that's what was going on in this book, in this movie. It was the extremists, the ones that are going, absolutely, it's the end of the world, and we have to do this, and blah, blah, blah. For them to be proven right.
Exactly.
That's a dangerous idea to be putting out there when we have so much conspiracy theory that goes on in this day and age.
I feel like there was there are 4 ways that you could have approached this ending. Number 1, you keep it faithful to the book. Right. It's the most nihilistic that you can go, but it will leave a punch. That being said, I can understand that, Universal produced this. They probably would have gotten squeamish about that. Right. 2, you keep it to where they do sacrifice Eric, but you don't know if anything happens.
Right. You leave it vague still.
Yeah. 3, they don't sacrifice any of themselves, and you still keep it vague. And then 4 is what the movie did.
I mean, to be fair, there's a 5th option.
What's the 5th option?
Which would be that they don't sacrifice anybody and they get a happy ending.
Yeah. Which, I struggle to think of what the best version of the movie could have been. Because I can understand a studio being squeamish about we don't want to kill a kid in a movie,
right?
Even though
they do it all the time.
It's like Paramount did that in the opening of A Quiet Place where they killed a toddler,
right? Oh my gosh, we weren't even parents yet when we saw that.
I wonder what there's a cat a lot in that trailer for Quiet Place Day 1.
Oh,
I wonder if they're gonna kill
probably.
That cat.
Anyway,
but so. I don't know what the best option would have been for that.
It wasn't what we got.
It wasn't what we got. I think what they did was the worst option. And here's the thing to understand is that, you brought up that even if it was a heterosexual couple, it would still be problematic. But because you have it as a homosexual couple, you have that extra layer in there. You have one of them be a victim of a hate crime by one of the people that is terrorizing them. Yeah. And I don't care what anybody says, horror and queerness have been around since the beginning of horror in entertainment. Yeah. You go all the way back to Mary Shelley, who is a queer woman writing one of the first major horror stories. Right. So I
And
don't.
often not getting the credit for it, by the way.
So it's an inherently queer genre, whether people want to admit it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's there's a responsibility there to have some positive representation some way or another. There's a lot of bad representation. We've
Mm-hmm.
had years of that.
Oh, yeah.
You can look at an example like Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs,
Right.
which, that's
Yes.
a discussion for another day.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the end of what they do in the movie, by having a gay character be essentially the sacrificial lamb,
Mm-hmm.
first of all falls into the bury your gays trope in
Right.
horror, which, Chuck Tingle has a book coming out next month about that.
Right.
But then also, like, it kind of makes it to where, oh, hey, homophobia is the right way to go.
Right. That's how it feels. Like, yeah, no, that was definitely, I feel like there are bad endings to movies.
Yeah.
And there are absolutely irresponsible endings to movies, and I feel like that's what this one is.
And to me, that's where it pushes it over into this is probably the worst ending that Shyamalan has ever put in his films.
Now,
he's
granted,
notorious for a lot of bad endings, but
and the thing is that I don't generally hate his endings. That's I actually like a lot of his endings. Again, granted, I have not seen a lot of his more recent stuff, but no, this was a irresponsible, bad ending to a movie, and I am really disappointed in it.
It's disappointing as well because the movie it was almost there.
Yeah, like that whole first half, if not even first 2/3, we were like, "Wow, this is actually turning out really well."
Yeah, and then what I had feared had
then it flipped.
Pass. Yeah.
Then it just flipped right on its head.
Yeah, he's got a new movie coming out this year with Josh Hartnett. So we'll see.
No.
Oh, yeah, you haven't seen a trailer?
No, I haven't.
Don't do it.
Oh, God.
There's a twist in the trailer.
No!
That's how bad his twists are getting.
Oh.
Like, you can't... Listen, Shyamalan has no shame. He still defends The Last Airbender.
No Shyamalan?
Expect a lot of that. Well... Anything else that we want to talk about with this book?
I feel like we touched on most of the things that I wanted to talk about, at least.
Yeah, and it was a bummer that the movie couldn't. It's a shame too because I really would have loved to have seen the film adaptation of this work.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is when I first saw the trailer, because I watched the trailer like immediately after finishing the book,
right.
Because I only read the book a couple of years ago, and it was right when the movie... I think you actually suggested I should watch it because the movie was going to come out.
Right.
And so I finished the book. I had not watched any trailers yet, and I finished the book and immediately, again, while I was at work, immediately finished the book and just watched the trailer right away. And I was like, whoa, these characters don't look at all how they're supposed to look. And I thought that was going to be the issue. I thought that was going to be the problem, but that wasn't the issue at all. And in fact... they kind of played out really well the way that, Leonard was Dave Bautista. And that was one of the issues I had in the trailer. I'm like, he's supposed to be 24 and a half. What?
They also, here's one other thing I want to touch on is that the book makes it kind of overt that they are analogs for the Four Horsemen.
Right, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
I think that gets lost in the movie because they changed the roles up a little bit.
Oh. I mean... Again, I didn't rewatch it, so I don't know for sure. But I felt like I still got the analogy, but that might just be because I was expecting it, like I had already read the book.
Because as you know, like Four Horsemen is war, famine, pestilence, death.
Right.
But in the movie, it's malice, healing, nurturing, and guidance. Was that
a thing they actually said out loud?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't remember that.
Jonathan Groff was like, it's okay. You can kill me. You'll be fine.
Oh.
Which, I love Jonathan Groff, but maybe between that and Matrix Resurrections, he should not do movies.
Oh no, I forgot about that.
Just give me.
Just
give me a third season of Mindhunter.
I know.
Netflix,
please.
And we'll be happy.
Yes.
All right. So, but I think that the book itself I would call it a masterwork. I think it's Tremblay's best thing that he has written by far. Granted, he has written a couple of good things here and there.
I definitely need to read more. I put more on my Libby so I can.
And we are doing
read
this
'em.
episode in anticipation for his newest book coming out on Monday, a horror movie.
Yes.
Which you pre-ordered for me for my birthday.
I did. And you say Monday, but as we're recording this, it's next Monday. But
That's right.
as it's coming out, it'll be the
out by
previous
that
Monday.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. So the book that just came out.
But I think that this is such a amazing critique on faith, on confirmation bias, on just the nature of
humanity
and whether or not, if we have to do horrible things, is it really worth it?
Right.
And then also, like, is that, is there even a valid reason for doing it? Are these people even right? But I think it's just so smart and so brilliant, and that's why my rating, I would probably give it 4.5 out of 5 skulls.
My rating is 4 skulls.
4 skulls.
Definitely a really, really good book. It's really solid. I really enjoyed it, but it's not one of those that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till the next time I read this. Like, I read it again today. I started it this morning, finished it during bedtime with the kids, and I really loved it.
Yeah.
A lot, but it wasn't, oh my gosh, my favorite book ever. So 4 skulls.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, that's it for Cabin at the End of the World. Next month, we're going to be talking about Camp Damascus from Chuck Tingle in preparation for his upcoming book, Bury Your Gaze.
Yep.
And until then, you can find me on mrhyperaware.wordpress.com. And you can find Alyssa on...
I'm on YouTube as the Earbud Bookworm. And
also as Alyssa Darby Davis.
Yes, I don't post on that one as much anymore.
Yeah, but,
all right.
But until then...
See you in the next chapter of Pages from the Dark Side.
This has been a production of Pages from the Dark Side. Sound and video production by Alyssa and Dylan Ludwig. Music and artwork by Aaron Shively.